Hello, everyone. Welcome to Not Your Average Goat. This is a show that celebrates all the shapes, sizes, and colors of diversity as well as adversity, while creating a space for authentic and vulnerable conversations that hopefully you find to be meaningful and relatable. Through these conversations, my guests and I hope to have an impact on dismantling deeply ingrained stigma and prejudice. How are you doing this morning?
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me. Excited, of course, to be on here. When I sent you that LinkedIn message, it was half jokingly. I was excited more to listen to the podcast than to be on it, but I appreciate you reaching out.
Well, I'm actually glad you mentioned that because when I started this project, I put together a list of people who, one, I thought fit with my brand and mission, but secondly, who I thought would be really open to talking about their stories and also would say yes. Actually asking people to be on the show is one of the hardest things. I think it's why I kept putting this project off for so long. So I never thought that almost everyone I asked would say yes, but at the same time, I also never thought that I would have, once I started promoting it, that people would actually start reaching out. So I'll just plug that for everyone, anyone listening. You think you have a really great story that others could relate to and be inspired by, please reach out and let's talk. I was really happy when you did that. It made me feel great. I was like, oh, people actually, are interested in being on the show. So that's really cool.
Awesome. Yeah. No, it's great. Like I said, you and I, obviously, we worked for a short period of time together way back. I've always enjoyed having conversations with you and all that stuff. And so it was cool to see something. Oh, hey, I get to listen to Tisha. It was more of that for me. When I first saw it, like I told you leading into this when we first talked about doing this, I wasn't sure if my story was interesting or whatever. You know what I mean? I don't really I don't know. I just wasn't thinking about it that way. So talking to you kind of made me kind of think about it. I was like, oh yeah, I guess a few things are a little weird.
Yeah, that's really awesome because I think a lot of us kind of look at our own stories and don't really see the value or the interesting aspect of it. So I always think, and we were talking about this a little bit ago, we don't necessarily want to hear a story that's a play-by-play exactly what we went through. Yeah. We want to hear someone's story that's slightly different, but that we can relate to. And maybe we've had analogous or adjacent experiences that we can learn from. So
Yeah. No, I agreed. Yeah. I mean, hopefully somebody, whoever listens to this can get something out of it.
So we've known each other now for a handful of years. We were working together at an ed tech company in the digital marketing department. And so we're both digital marketing nerds, which I really love because you were one of the people who I really enjoyed. There weren't a ton of people who would actually talk digital marketing with me. So it was really always fun to just when we had meetings together to just kind of nerd out a little bit and talk strategy and things like that.
For sure. And see, that's the thing. When it comes to digital marketing, I'm an uber nerd. I've learned to just pare it back. I know most people don't care or don't understand or don't care to understand it or anything like that. So I do, but whenever I do find that digital market kindred spirit, if you will, it's exciting because then I can talk to you on a technical level without feeling, you know what I mean? And beyond that, really, it was more, I enjoyed the exploring of ideas and strategies and things like that, testing things out, you know what I mean? Kind of going beyond the limitations that were kind of initially given within the platforms. And talking to you again, you understand it and you can think outside the box as well. So yeah, for sure. It was always awesome.
You had kind of your a different career before digital marketing, and because you had come into this career a few years prior before we start working together, I felt your curiosity was still kind of at that super high level, which kind of reinvigorated my own curiosity and excitement about it. Yeah.
That's awesome. I'm glad to hear that. I'm glad I could do that. I mean, for me, I think just in general, I like the challenge, whatever the challenge is, right? When I'm committed to something, just historically, even in my career, at least in the digital world, I've always been the guy that hey, we have a problem, or hey, we need to figure this out, or something like that, or figure out a way to do this, whatever this is. And so those challenges is what I think kind of keeps me going in the digital marketing world. And over time, and it feels like a lot of these platforms have pulled away a lot of information from us, or abilities levers to pull, if you will, for optimizations. So it forces us to kind of think outside the box further and stuff like that. So that's, I think, why I've been still curious and still like really interested in it all, because it's like as they take more away from us as analysts, marketers, whatever word you want to use, it's forced us to think further and further outside the box. And I enjoy that. I love that part. You know what I mean? I don't shy away from it.
So, Manny, what were you like around like 8, 9 years old? Do you remember kind of like what your passions were and your personality?
Yeah. Yeah. I was super into baseball. Like I was started playing baseball when I was like 5 or something. Little league stuff, obviously, with my dad, and my oldest brother played for a while too. Um, I love the Mets, still do to this day. I'm not up on baseball as much as I over the last like couple of years for whatever reason, but yeah, I was huge into baseball. I was really good at school. I was in the advanced classes and all that stuff. I was a good kid. You know what I mean? I didn't get in trouble. Mind you, I also kind of didn't know the environment I was growing up in at that time. I grew up in Upper Manhattan in New York. Kind of a rough area, but I was pretty much protected until like 9. And then at 10, I started going outside, and, my mom started to trust me a little bit more to go outside and do, that's when, I started doing stupid, kid stuff or whatever in the neighborhood and stuff like that. And as things started kind of going bad, it was like time to leave. I was 11, you know what I mean? I got in trouble, a few little things, nothing crazy, but like, between that and my brothers and everything going on in the neighborhood, yeah, my parents were smart in doing so, by the way. As much as I hated living in Florida, they probably moved me at the right moment to make sure I didn't go down, bad paths and stuff like that.
So both of your parents are Puerto Rican, and they came over to kind of like the greater US. Did they know each other in Puerto Rico, or did they move once they came over here?
So funny story about that. So my dad came when he was 10. He first moved to Florida, I think to like the Miami area, and then moved to New York when he was 12. My mom didn't move till she was 26. My dad's only a couple years older than her. They never met in Puerto Rico, but my mom grew up around a lot of my dad's family. So like in the area, like on the mountain where they all kind of grew up or whatever, or where my mom grew up, a lot of my dad's family also lived in that area as well. And my dad knew a lot of her family. So when she moved to New York, my dad knew her brother, I believe. And that's how they met, at a party or something like that. And she moved in with him like a week after she had moved here, and basically been together ever since.
Oh, wow. That's kind of crazy, but I mean, it seems like a happy story. They're still together. That's so cool. So your dad was about 10, your mom was a little bit older when she came over. Were there any specific like values from their cultures that they kind of wove into their nurturing of you and your brothers that you can recall?
Family is a big thing.
Yeah.
I think so for my dad, so my parents they come from a big family. My dad's one of 9, my mom's one of 10 kids, and they're on the younger side too. Like I think my dad's like the second or third youngest. My mom is like the third youngest. But I think for my dad, a lot of it seemed like, at least as a kid, and looking back now, like a lot of responsibilities in the family kind of often fell on my dad, and it seemed like he was the most stable one, basically, of all of his brothers and sisters and stuff like that. And by virtue of my mom as well, kind of being that as well, but like her family wasn't as crazy, if you will, as my dad. But like it seemed like a lot of stuff fell on my dad, and my dad had to often step up, whether it's to help, his other brothers, nephews, cousins, his own parents, that kind of thing. So there was always like this thing of family, and like, I grew up with my 3 brothers living in a house. They came from a previous relationship my dad had. So it was always like, not always, but for a period of time, it was like 5 of us in the house. So there's a lot of family, just making sure we're watching out for each other as best we can, especially, like I said, the environment we're living in, just making sure we're staying out of trouble, which was a failure
Yeah.
for the most part. But you know what I mean? But it was still like, hey, just keep your head straight. Really, I think the big installations as far as nurturing came after we moved, because it was like, look, we left because of this. You know what I mean? Don't mess it up, essentially. Not like putting pressure on me, but like take the opportunity that you have to put yourself on the right path, essentially. Um, and I mean, there was pressure, I think, when I got older and I was getting like closer to graduation in high school. I think from my dad, at least, I think, thinking back now, at the time, I thought, he was just being mean. But like, I think back now, I think it's like, well, yeah, he had 3 kids, none of them finished high school. You're the smart one, right? Like, that's just kind of been the label. And so if you mess up, like, then it's like, Jesus Christ, can I get anything right? You know what I mean? At least like, you know what I mean? Like, that's how
Yeah.
I would feel as a father now that I am a father. And so I think some of that pressure, and a lot of it was, he didn't understand what I was trying to do, or didn't really understand kind of my viewpoints on things. And to be fair, I also wasn't communicating it very well at that point either. So I think, so yeah, so the installation that they had with all that, it was just like, just make sure, you don't mess up, like, you know what I mean? Because in reality, for the most part, my family comes, poverty and all that stuff. And I think just my parents have always chased that American dream, and they just wanted to make sure that, that I had that, um, and that I didn't have to worry, essentially, like they did raising us and stuff.
So you grew up in the projects just outside of Harlem, like back in the early 90s, like that, like just thinking about that time, I just like blows my mind because of all the crime and just
Yeah.
everything going on in that area. Like you were still pretty young, but what's the first memory you kind of have realizing, oh crap, like I live here, either something you saw firsthand or something you heard from your brothers or something?
Yeah. So just to clarify, and I forgot to clarify this earlier. It wasn't projects. Like, projects are like a collection. It's essentially a neighborhood or a small neighborhood block or blocks of like similar buildings. I just lived on a regular block of building. It was just ghetto.
Got it.
But the first, see, that was the thing. Like, early on in my life, like, I wasn't, since I grew up in it, a lot of the things I didn't think were weird. But the first time that it kind of hit me, like, things like, wait, what's going on, was probably when my brother was shot. I was like 7, I think, when he got shot, maybe 8. Um, and he was in the, he was in the streets doing his thing at that point. He dropped out of high school, whatever. Um, and what out of, not to get into details of whatever the incident was or whatever, but basically he ended up getting shot in the hospital. I think the bullet like barely missed his lung. Like, it was bad. Like, it had gone, a half-inch slower type thing. It might have killed him. And he was 17 at the time, I think, when he got shot. And so that was the first time where I was like, whoa, hold on a second, wait, that's like, I knew people got shot, and I grew up hearing gunshots and stuff like that, but like, it was the first time it hit me, like, it was, oh, it's close to home. Like this is family now. Like, that's what's going on. You know what I mean? Because I never really thought about what he was doing. You know what I mean? Like, I'm 7 years old, 6 years old. Like, I'm not really aware of what my brothers are doing when they're not home. You know what I mean? I'm not thinking they're doing this or that, or that they will potentially get shot. So that was the first like big wake up call, kind of. But it didn't really all hit me until I moved, until I left. When I was 11, when I moved to Florida, and I was living in, I guess, what you would call a normal environment without those things. That's when I started kind of like the process, like, oh, that person, who I thought was funny is actually a drug addict. It was a crackhead, like, you know what I mean, as a kid. Or, wow, there were a lot of gunshots going on and ringing off a lot. You know what I mean? Like, that kind of thing. And like, again, I don't want to get into details. We see things happening around you. I think when you're young, you don't really process it because you don't really know what it is. Like, or you probably, replace it, somebody smoking weed in your head, and you're thinking, oh, they're probably just smoking a cigarette. And like, you don't really like process that that they're doing something illegal or whatever. And then again, as you get older and you learn more, and you say, oh no, that's what these people were doing. Oh, that's what she was doing. Oh, that's who, so and so. And then of course, as you get older, you start to hear more stories because your parents are like, all right, you're old enough to hear this. And like, you remember so and so? Well, they were doing this. And I'm like, wait, what? And you start connecting all these dots, and it starts to really like paint this crazy picture where you're like, oh man, like, I lived in a wild environment. Like, my parents did an amazing job of protecting me for as long as they could.
It is very interesting to think about your childhood. And I think one reflects back on it as an adult and really say, oh my gosh, like I didn't realize this was happening. But then also just thinking about how relative experiences are
Yeah.
from, whether it's joyful or painful, just thinking about the different, like similar to like a temperature. Like for me, 70 degrees might feel like the best thing ever, but for you, it might be like, oh God, I'm like sweating so bad.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So it's just so interesting to think about that and just kind of like the juxtaposition that you saw as your 11, 12-year-old self when you moved to Florida and just reflecting back on where you had come from.
It sucks for sure, but I mean, at the same time, I try to use those things like as the motivation essentially, right? Like whenever people like, oh, who inspires you? Who inspires me? No one inspires me. I don't, I didn't grow up wanting to be anyone. Like that's never been my thing. For me, it's been I want to make sure I'm good and that the people around me are good and that my children are better. And so I have to work towards that. You know what I mean? Because I grew up in that. Like, you know what I mean? I couldn't imagine raising my children in that type of environment. I understand, but at the same time, with my parents' situation, I mean, again, they were poor. That my mom didn't have education, my dad didn't either. Like, in New York, it's expensive, so you're kind of forced to live where you can afford to live. You know what I mean? So I'm not putting any negative things on them for that situation. They did the best they could. Like I said, they did an amazing job of protecting me. You know what I mean? Like I could tell you, inside my home, um, there wasn't a feeling of that, right? There wasn't a feeling of fear, a feeling of all that stuff. My parents made home a home, however they did it. So I'm lucky in that. So I try. I don't. I try not to look at it aside. For me, it's just motivation. It is what it is. I'm alive. My family's alive. Everybody's good. All right, let's keep it moving.
One thing that's really incredible about you and kind of where you were placed in your family is that you were so young and there was such a big gap between you and your older brothers
Yeah,
who were getting into more of the trouble and getting sucked into that world. You talked about, at the unfortunate time when your one brother was shot and, thank God that, it didn't hit his lungs. Was there anything else you kind of remember about watching them? Were there any other kind of experiences that they went through
yeah,
that kind of stand out to you?
yeah. Like you were saying, my brothers are a little older than me. They're 12, 10, and 7 years older. And so like I I was in this weird position, perfect position, if you will, where like I could I can see them essentially mess up, for lack of a better term, make their mistakes, if you will, and be young enough that I can't really follow in their footsteps, but old enough to be able to understand and process it, right? And give myself essentially that time so that if by the time I get to their age, I've kind of seen it already. I've seen what happened, right? Like I've seen I saw the mistake and the aftermath, and I don't want any part of it. So when those choices, if you will, or opportunities came about, I was like, no, I'm good. I literally saw what happened. I'm okay. None of my brothers finished high school. My oldest brother was married and divorced by the time he was like 21. After my brother was shot, he was in prison. He went to Rikers Island to begin with, but then went to um, kind of like a boot camp program thing for people who were like underage or barely 18 type of thing, almost like a second opportunity. Um, and then my other brother, again, he's been in our prison. Unfortunately, he's in prison now. And so, yeah, like I said, I was able to kind of see, and again, as I got older and learned more about the stuff that was going on, able to kind of piece things together and figure things out and yada yada yada. I was almost able to use them as a guide, essentially, as what not to do, at least in certain circumstances and things like that. So, um, I definitely benefited from that, and to this day, like I always say this, they're the biggest reasons why I am in whatever position I am in, which is not, a bad one. You know what I mean? I'm not rich or anything like that or whatever, but like, I'm not, I don't have those same worries.
So you moved to Florida when you're 11. What part of Florida do you guys move to?
Initially we moved to Deltona, a small little town, and then bounced around until we landed in Orlando. which is where we spent pretty much the entire time we lived in Florida at that point.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
I was born in Maryland, but when I was about a year or so, I was moved to Florida and I was there until I was about 7. We kind of traveled all around the Tampa Bay area. So living in
Okay.
Clearwater, Tallahassee, like in Tampa as well. So Orlando's
Okay.
not too far from there.
No.
I will never move back to Florida though, because it's way
Nope.
too muggy. Just
Hell
way
yeah.
too
It is
muggy.
the worst. That's the biggest reason I left. Like it's the worst feeling in the world when it's like the middle of the summer and you're trying to go out. Just go out. Just hang out with friends, outside, and like it's still muggy. Like why is it muggy at 9 o'clock at night? Like what kind of BS is this? Like yeah, no. It was horrible.
Obviously, looking back now, your parents made like an incredible decision to move you out of that environment into Florida. But trying to put yourself back in your 11-year-old head, do you remember like struggling with anything, like any emotions that you were going through being moved out of your home into like a new place?
Yeah, I was excited at first, because it was something new and never been there and yada yada yada. But pretty soon after, like I mean, before so I moved to Florida in August, and I remember by like Thanksgiving, I was like, I hate this place.
Oh man, why?
I just didn't like it there. I didn't vibe with the people. I didn't, with the other kids and stuff like that. Even though a lot of them came from New York too. Those were the ones that I tended to like literally all of my friends at first from in Florida were all from New York. Like we all for whatever reason. But like anybody else, like it just didn't vibe, especially early on. Like so we moved to Deltona. It was the first time I was in a school where it was like all white kids, right?
Mm.
And which is fine until the other people make it obvious to you. You know what I mean? And it wasn't like I don't mean it like, oh, kids are being like racist or anything like that. But it would be like, oh, you don't wear Jinko jeans? That's weird. And I'm like, and I'm looking at these jeans. I'm like, it looks stupid anyways. Like, but you're really, you're really judging me because I'm not wearing the same type of pants as you. Like, like if at that point, at least in New York, like we had uniforms in schools and stuff like that for the most part. So like that wasn't really a thing that I ran into at that point. And so, and then it starts from there to, obviously I'm from New York, so I dress different to like, oh, you're Puerto Rican, you speak Spanish, like, oh, you say something in Spanish. And it's like, that's fine the first time, but when like 1,000 people ask you, you really start to feel like, dude, I'm not like, I'm not a vending machine or whatever for you to just, yeah, say something Spanish, hola, like, what do you want me to do? You're not even paying me. Like, come on, like, let's like, stop. Like, so like it just became like I said, I don't think anybody was trying to be offensive or anything like that. But like I think when kids see something different, they can't help but to point it out. When I got to Orlando, it was better just because it was all Puerto Ricans. But again, I was still very different from them in my personality and excuse me or whatever. So like it was just hard to fit in and now that I'm older, I know there's tons of other factors and stuff like that. We had talked about that too. But yeah, it was just like, and it was hot, never stopped being hot. And I was just like, what the hell is going on?
So, for a brief time when I was 11, we actually went back to Florida after being in Maryland for some time. And so I was entering middle school. I lived in a neighborhood up here in Maryland where, is very mixed, a lot of people in the Black community, white people, and the schools kind of reflected that too. So it was like a very like well mixed school of
Mhm.
diversity. When I went to Florida, though, I was living in, I believe, Clearwater, and the school I went into, it's not like there weren't any people of color, but there were very few.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And the people who were of color were like they were Black or like very dark skinned. And, being a biracial female of color, I would get a lot of, comments of people like saying things like, oh, like you're an Oreo baby because you're mixed races. And I was like, what are you talking about? Like, and it was like so,
Yeah. So the one thing I remember picking up like in the differences in conversations from like New York to to Florida, at least at that point. I don't know if things have changed, but like when people would tell a story, right? I would tell you a story. I'd be like, oh yeah, this guy walked in and did that, and then this woman did this, and blah blah blah, blah, right? That, whatever. In Florida, people be like, yeah, this black guy walked in and da da da. Whether him being black had anything to do with the story didn't matter, right? So they'd be like, this black guy, did this thing. Why are you telling me he's black?
Yeah.
And then this Asian woman and this Mexican guy are you, first of all, are you sure he's Mexican? Or are you just saying, are you trying to say Hispanic, Latino? Like, what does that have to do with the story though? Like, exactly. You know what I mean? Like, and it would just be this weird thing where it's like, why are you giving me ethnic and racial descriptors again, if it doesn't matter for this, if it matters for the story, obviously, you know what I mean? If I say, hey, this guy said the N-word to this guy, it'd be like, it would matter to be like, yeah, this white guy said the N-word to this black guy. You know what I mean? Okay, that's part of the story. That's a horrible example. I don't know why I went that extreme, but like,
I think it's a great example though. But I notice it even today. And anytime I hear it, I call it out. Like if someone starts, oh yeah, like there was this like Korean woman or there was this Hispanic man. I was like, okay, like why can't you just say there was a woman or there was a man?
Yeah.
Why does it matter?
That was exactly. That was the one thing that like I've always that got picked up on almost immediately. And like the one thing with the schools too, I noticed in Florida is like they're very segregated.
Mm-hmm.
Not like it like New York is like that too, right? Like if you're in a neighborhood that's mostly Hispanic, like I grew up in, the school is mostly Hispanic. But it really felt like a lot of the kids who were Hispanic, who lived in areas where it was mostly white, would just bus in and vice versa. Or would lie on their school thing, about where they live so they can go to the right. Because I had a lot of friends who were technically supposed to go to a different school, but they didn't want to go because it was mostly white. And so they just, lied on the application and went to my school.
Well, there's this concept of exposure privilege that I've talked about some, and like the idea that there is privilege in being able to grow up in a neighborhood or go to school where there is so much diversity of cultures, languages, religions, gender identities, because then you grow up and you know no different.
No, I was saying, even if you encounter something different, you've been exposed to difference, so you can at least accept it. I think is also the big one, right? Like, if you grow up seeing, I don't know, interracial couples and things like that, then when you see a gay couple older, you're like, all right, that's maybe just another thing. Versus like if you never see it, then anything else is going to be completely blasphemous in your mind or something like that. Potentially, obviously not always the case, but potentially. Or at least it just becomes harder to accept, I think.
Yeah. And I think too, like if you have grown up with all that diversity and you see something that you haven't seen, you're like, oh, I've seen so much. How come I haven't seen you before? Like I want to know all about you. That's at least how I get. So I don't know if I can speak for everyone, but I mean, like diversity makes me excited. Like if I haven't come across a culture that I've never been exposed to, like I just get excited and want to learn all about you. But anyway.
I'm the same way, because like for me it's like exactly. I just want to learn. I just want to know. Like I'm just a curious person by nature. It's just fun to learn new things and stuff like that. But I also try to be respectful because I've been on the other end of that, so I never want to like push it. Like I never do the whole like, oh, say something in Chinese or say something in Korean or say something in whatever. Like I don't, not that kind of thing. But like I try to make it like a normal conversation. We're just gonna talk. I know it's gonna come up at some point, so like I'm not even gonna like go that hard on trying to dig as much as like I'll dig once we get to it, right? Like, you know what I mean?
So when you're 13, you start rapping. So had you always been into music? Like, how did this kind of passion come up?
Yeah, I mean, I grew up with music and I just always enjoyed music. Growing up, my parents played salsa all the time, especially on, Sundays when mom was cleaning and stuff like that. Parties as well. My dad, I remember growing up, I ended up using them too. He had these giant speakers and we bought this whole like sound system thing for parties and stuff like that. And once I got older and was making beats, I actually used it all to make beats. But yeah, I was always around, I was always around music in some form. And then like growing up in New York, obviously grew up listening to a lot of hip hop, exposed to that. And I got the itch to just start writing in general when I first moved to Florida, but like it turned into rapping, like me actually trying to put it on beats and stuff like that when I was 13. And I think at that point it was just like, again, I didn't have as many friends and or could do, I just felt, I think I just needed an outlet essentially, I think at that point. And that's just kind of how it manifested itself.
Got it. Do you remember kind of like what you would write or rap about, like kind of like the topics that inspired you?
Wow, I haven't thought about those old raps in a very long time. Now I think about it, I think a lot of the stuff that I was saying, like when I was connecting the dots and like, figuring things out and kind of really figuring out the environment I grew up in, a lot of that was coming out on those in like on paper. That, you know what I mean? Like I remember writing a lot about like not knowing that this was this, or figuring out that this was this, or that like, you know, this person who died actually died because of this, you know what I mean, as opposed to what I was told or whatever. Like, so it was a lot of like, I think that was helping me probably kind of process a lot of that stuff also. Wow, I have not thought about those lyrics in like 20 years.
So rapping for you sounds like it was almost like your diary in a way.
Yeah, yeah. I think over time it was always that. Like I'm not gonna say like I moved away from it, but like as I got older, better or whatever, and became more of like a songwriter, if you will, in the process, it was less analysis of like my life as a child and kind of processing things, and it just became more of like it just depended on the song and what I wanted to do. But I would express myself for sure. Like if something was frustrating me, I would definitely put it in lyrics and stuff like that. So I moved away from diary ish, you know what I mean, to be just more music in general. But definitely still had elements of it for sure. I mean, there's songs that I can think of where, I definitely was just letting out a lot of frustration or just trying to cope with things, if you will. And sometimes I would twist it a little bit, maybe it was a little vaguer, so it wasn't as obvious for whatever reason. But there are a lot of lyrics where I can still remember the thought or what I was feeling at that time when I was writing it for sure.
So you rapped for a pretty long time. It followed you into your young adulthood. How did that experience start to change for you? You like your friends were also getting involved with rapping
Yeah,
as well.
yeah. So I met my best friend in ninth grade, but we were cool. We hung out in school or whatever, but we didn't really become like best friends until like 11th. And he knew I rapped because I had a book, but I never showed it. Like I was very proud. I didn't show anybody anything. Like he was the first person I ever like rapped to, I think. Um, and I don't know, we just like kind of linked up again in 11th grade. Probably had like a class together or something. And we started hanging out outside of school. And he was like, "Yo, I rap, by the way." He's like, "I know you rap. You used to carry that notebook and blah blah blah." And for him, he just moved to Florida when he was 14. So, and he kind of experienced a very similar thing where everyone was very different. Just did not get along with people. He just didn't vibe with the people or whatever, that kind of thing. But he and I vibe. Like he and I are like twins, man. Like, even in our raps, like honestly, like when we were rap together, like we would have to keep checking in on each other because we would often say the same thing, not the same way, but we would literally hit on same points and be like, all right, one of us has to change it. Like we can't literally rap about the same thing in the song, or whatever. So that's like how much in sync, if you will, he and I were. And so like once he said, like he was like, "Yeah, I rap," and he was good, and you know what I mean, and I wanted to get better, and so that's kind of how it started from there. It was just like we would just kind of hang out and rap over beats that we found online, and then eventually became I started making beats like senior year, and then after that I'd gone to tech school and met another guy, Marino, who also rapped, and eventually we all kind of, the three of us, became a group. And then a few years later, my my friend Robert, my best friend that I was talking about, his cousin moves down and he raps too. So we had this 4-man group type thing. It wasn't like a solid like this is a 4-man group as much as like we were just like a collective. Like it was like me and Robert were like a group, and then those two were here, and we would do songs with each other type of thing. And I make beats for everyone or whatever. And Marino would learn how to make beats too as well, or he kind of knew but like stopped and then started again. And So it was just fun. Yeah, we was just making songs, we made some projects. It was awesome. It was fun times for sure.
The Aspira Association promotes the empowerment of the Puerto Rican and Latina community by developing and nurturing the leadership, intellectual, and cultural potential of its youth. Learn more at aspira.org. That's ASPIRA.org.
You and your wife are actually high school sweethearts, which I think is so cool.
Kind of, yeah. We dated in ninth and 10th grade. Weren't together for 11th and 12th, but like 12th grade we had a trigonometry class together. And that kind of started a friendship up again, if you will. And then after high school, there were some you know, situations, if you will, between she and I. But we always stayed in touch. At one point, she moved to the West Coast, and I was working overnight, so that 3-hour difference kind of worked out. You know, for the first couple hours of the night, she and I would just talk on the phone since I didn't really have anything to do.
So you dated throughout high school for a little bit, broke up, and then when she moved to Virginia, you guys got back together. When was that?
Yeah, so this is like 2009, I want to say, right? 2008, 2009. Yeah,
Yeah.
she was moving. She didn't have anybody to help. Basically, she didn't have family in the area to help her move the stuff around and all that stuff like that. So I volunteered. I always tell her. So basically, I literally, by the time I like flew to see her, I'd been up like 30 hours because I worked overnight. So I always say, you know, she took advantage of me, if you will. But yeah, like it was that trip that kind of sparked it. And then like a month later, a few weeks later, like we were on the phone together, and I asked her out officially. I was like, hey, you know, let's try this out or whatever.
So you guys end up getting married, and you also now doing your degree, end up graduating with your bachelor's it's in marketing, right? Your bachelor's?
Yeah, it's a BSBA with a focus in marketing. I think it's what they officially say.
Yeah, yeah. And this was like a long journey for you because you didn't initially go to school, and then you did the tech school for a little bit and then started at
Yeah.
community college. What do you remember like when you took that last final exam or got your diploma?
Oh,
What do you remember? Like how did you
man.
feel?
I remember the final day of exams because so I set up my exams literally from hardest to easiest, right? Like in the order I was going to take them. So I
That's
knew
smart.
exactly. Yeah. So I was like, all right, I'll focus on test one. Boom. I know I need a C to pass it. Like I didn't care if I got a C, B, or A at that point. I just wanted to pass. So I did the math. All right, I need a whatever to pass this class. All right, boom. I need a 70. That's the one. That's the hardest one. I'll focus on this one. All right, test two. You know, I need a lower score. Cool. And then by the last one, it was like I can literally fail this and I still pass. It does not matter. So I just walked in the happiest I'd ever walked into a testing center. So much so that even the person behind, you know, the table or whatever, when they give you all that stuff, you're signing in, she's like, you seem very happy for a test. I was like, it's the last one and I'm done. I'm graduating. She's like, oh, wow. And she's like, well, good luck. I was like, I won't need it. Just walked in. 10 minutes later, walked out. And she's like, you're done? I was like, yeah, I'm done. Bye. And I walked out and I could barely, I'm surprised I wasn't skipping to my car, basically. I was so happy.
Oh man. Yeah, I mean, and just like the journey you took and thinking about when you were a young child and that environment that you grew up in and then getting to hear, like that's like it's so incredible. And you mentioned to me one time, and I loved it about kind of crediting how you were able to get where you are back then and probably even today is that, you know, while everyone else from your childhood ended up zigging, you zagged, which I thought
Yeah.
was so great. Like talk to me more about that. Like what does that mean to you?
Yeah. I mean, I was lucky enough to like, I was lucky enough to be observant enough, if you will, to see a lot of people again zig when you know they should have zagged, and so I did it for them, essentially for myself. A lot of even you know going back to like the friends and stuff in Florida, like a lot of them you know dropped out or finished high school and just ended up getting kind of regular hourly jobs and you know living a normal life. There's nothing wrong with any of that. You know, I'm not trying to disparage anything like that. But I knew there was an issue when I got hired doing security and I was getting paid $12 an hour and I was only getting paid more than most of my friends. You know what I mean? Like at 20 something years old, 19, 20 years old. And I was like, nah, I can't do this the rest of my life. You know what I mean? Like, I was looking around, I'm seeing these people in their 30s and 40s, barely making anything more than I am, hating their job, and working around people who've been at the same job for 20 years and still barely make what the average person makes in a household in a year. Like, and not to focus this all on money, but like again, I grew up very poor. A lot of the problems that I had were because I was poor, right? Like the neighborhood I lived in wasn't because it was a luxury neighborhood, right? Um, so again, my focus is always making sure I'm making enough money so that I'm not living in that situation. That's all it was. And same thing with Florida. Florida wasn't a great situation. I mean, and the economy there sucks. It's pretty much all service industry anyway. And so, yeah, I was just like, for me, it was kind of just seeing all these people, like I said, all my friends, my family, especially. I have tons of family who unfortunately, have criminal records or dealt with addiction or whatever, all those things. I was observant enough to see all that and just made sure not to go down those paths whenever I could.
I really love that. And it's great that you saw that, because sometimes people can like look at where they are currently and see where other people are who are quote unquote ahead of them because of age, and say like,
Yeah.
oh man, like this is all I can do. Or say, oh, like I see all these other people who are doing incredible things, but
Yeah.
it looks so hard. Like I will
See,
never make it there.
And I think that's a big problem, especially I think in the Hispanic community. I think we often limit ourselves. And because of that, because it's like, oh, do you see any, famous Hispanic people? No. So, all right, well, then we can't be fans. Do you see a Hispanic doctor? No, then we can't be doctors. And it's not like explicit like that, but like I remember hearing growing up, like, do you see, Puerto Ricans on Jeopardy? You know what I mean? Do you see Puerto Ricans on Wheel of Fortune? Just as I know those aren't necessarily the same, but you understand what I'm trying to say. Like, it's like, oh, you don't see them there, so we don't exist there. And it's like, no, what? Like, that's dumb. And I remember like, and here's the funny thing. So like, at least again, when I grew up in my time, like going to Valencia, the community college in Orlando, and never finishing is very common. Almost everyone picks up a class or two or semester or two and then never finishes, right? So for me, when I started it, people were like, all right, yep, good luck. Like, as in, yeah, I'm sure you're going to do it. And then when I actually was like, oh, hey, I'm transferring to UCF, everyone was like, wait, what? You finished? You got your AA? Yeah, that's why I went to Valencia, folks.
Yeah.
And then like when I graduated from UCF and I would tell people my plans, they would not laugh. Well, some people did laugh, but they were thinking like, oh, this young kid who has this like, idealized dream of how things are going to work. And I'm like, no, I know what the plan is. Like, I remember specifically telling certain people like, yeah, once I graduate, me and my wife, I was like, we did the math. We just have to make about 80 grand a year combined. To cover these costs until this point, and then from there, hopefully we can make this much more when these bills come. Like we were literally planning this thing out, and people looking at me like I'm crazy. Oh yeah, so yeah, you think you're gonna be fine making 40 grand a year? I was like, no, that's not what I said. I said if we make this to start,
yeah,
we are going to grow. I was like, listen to the plan. You're listening to the numbers and not listening to what I'm saying. This is what I'm doing. Remember when you guys looked at me like I was crazy when I started UCF? I just finished, or excuse me, Valencia. I just finished UCF. Clearly I know how to plan. Like, you know what I mean? Like, and I'm not trying to show off. I'm just like, for me, it was more of like, I would try to encourage people. Like when I was going to Valencia, I would tell, yeah, go to Valencia. Dude, all you gotta do is this and that and blah, blah. Yo, even my, I have a friend. I'm not gonna call him out by name because I love him. I started my first semester of college. He moved back to Florida. And I told him, I was like, yo, if you start now, I will hold off a semester for myself so that you just catch up and we will take all of the same classes at the same time. And I will help you make sure you graduate. He said no. He had other plans, which is fine. I continued down my path. Years later, he tried to start school, didn't work out. Much harder when you're older and you have more responsibilities and things that are going on. It's not that he wasn't smart enough; he's plenty smart, um, or anything like that. It's not that he's not motivated; he's plenty motivated. But life does get in the way sometimes. And as you get older, I think that becomes, there become more obstacles and stuff like that. So it just didn't work out for him. That's it. You know what I mean? He's doing fine. He's living his life. He's doing his thing. But I can't help but to wonder sometimes, could things have been different had he just, taken the opportunity essentially that I was offering. And again, other people just in general, like, yo, start school. Yo, it's not that hard. You just got to do this, and this. Like I was trying to encourage people to do things for themselves. And I do have one friend, Rudy, who he was a valet. He finished high school, but he was a valet for a few years, whatever. Then he found out his girlfriend's pregnant. He went into super dad mode, got his CDL license, started driving trucks, started making real money, bought a house, got married, had kids. Like he set himself up right. It was there are not a ton of examples of that I could point to where people do it like that, where it's like, oh, I have a responsibility to make more money, or I have a responsibility to step up and do this. I'm going to do it. A lot of people fall back on that, like, oh, that's hard. Like you were saying, and it's frustrating.
Yeah. I know that sometimes there's not that support or there's not that representation like you were talking about. Like, I don't see Puerto Rican doctors. I don't see Puerto Rican, celebrities. And thank goodness for J-Lo and Bad Bunny. And I love the pride. I love the pride that everyone has in
we're
those
prideful
people.
folks.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
I love it so much. But we as a society need to start being our own cheerleaders and value ourselves more, especially if you don't have cheerleaders rooting for you at home. So
it's really weird with I feel like, especially with Puerto Ricans, it's really weird because we, other than sports, right? It feels like a lot of us, previous generations, I don't want to speak to the one now, but it felt like previous generations often limited themselves because of that. And I think that sometimes leaked into the kids. And but at the same time, it's weird because when there is a celebrity or whatever that's Puerto Rican, we get behind them 1,000,000%. So it's like, I don't understand why we can't get behind the kids who want to do more early, folks. Like, come on, you know what I mean? I think things have gotten a little bit better when it comes to stuff like that. But yeah, it's weird. It's like once somebody makes it, it's like, oh, boom, champion them. But it's like, well, what? Let's push early so we get more of those. Don't you think? So I don't know.
Hi, my wonderful goat friends. Firstly, thank you so much for your support and listening. If you're enjoying this conversation and other episodes of the podcast, I'd like to ask you to please give us a 5-star review on Spotify, Apple, or whichever platform you are listening on right now. And if you're so inclined, we love to hear your feedback in a full review. Also, might be a great idea to hit subscribe on that platform you're listening to right now so you can get notified of new episodes as they are released. Thank you so much again for being one of our loyal GOAT listeners.
In 2017, you and your wife are about to have your first set of kids. And I say set because you guys actually have twin boys.
Yep. They're about to turn 5.
Soon. Which is so crazy because when I met you, they were, I don't even think they were 1 yet. So
they were like a year and a half, I think, when we met. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Cause we didn't start at the company at the same time.
Yeah. My daughter was it was a year. Yeah.
Got it. Yeah. But in 2017, so you guys are expecting your twins, but this is also a big time for you, a tipping point in terms of mental health. You were dealing with some things. Can you talk to me about what you remember back then?
Yeah. So leading up to my kids being born, the months before, we also were buying a home. At that point, we were living in an apartment when she got pregnant. So we wanted to buy a house, 2 kids. We're like, it's probably best that way. And I just started dealing with a ton of anxiety. And even after the house was bought, it just kept building and building and building, leading up to the kids being born. And so I've dealt with anxiety my whole life, like really bad anxiety. And so I would look online, knowing obviously Google's not a doctor, but I would look online, like the different symptoms, the different things I'm feeling and all that stuff like that. And, Google gives you like that list. It could be this, this, this. And every single time I kept putting these symptoms or these feelings or whatever, the only consistent one that kept showing up on that list was ADHD. And I was like, there's no way I'm ADHD. No, I was like, that's ridiculous. And then I went on and took like 2 or 3 tests, just like, again, I know it's not a doctor. I know these aren't official. But I was like, on a whim, let's just see. And every single time it'd be like, yeah, you probably got ADHD. And I was like, clearly this thing is BS. Like, and just kept like, nah, it can't be. It can't be. So years go by, again, dealing with the anxiety and stuff. I finally get into therapy and did therapy for about a year. And after that year or so, the therapist says, hey, question. She's like, did I ever bring up to you ADHD? And I was like, huh? I was like, no. She's like, yeah, after our very first meeting, I put down that you might have ADHD on the side, like as a note. But she's like, yeah, I never brought it back up. But like, yeah, it seems like you might have ADHD.
Oh, thanks, Doc.
Yeah, no. Maybe she was looking for more evidence. I don't know. No, I'm not gonna knock her. I'm not a therapist. I don't know what the process is. So, but yeah. So that kind of led me down the path of like, finally getting evaluated and tested and all that stuff. And so I did later that year. This is in 2020 now, or no, 2021. Sorry, last year. So it was like a good 4 years basically before I even had anyone tell me I might have it. Between when I thought that first thing that popped in my mind and somebody said it. Did the test, and basically after the evaluation, spoke with the person who did the test with me, and she was saying, basically based on the conversations and the test scores and all that stuff, she's like, the reason you didn't think and no one around you thought that you were ADHD or you had ADHD was because basically you got outsmarted. Like, and we had conversations about different things that happened in my life, and she was bringing up specific examples of like, yeah, when this happened, you quickly reacted and did this, and then no one found out, or no one was the wiser, or whatever. You know what I mean? Like, or you overcompensated doing this, and so it seemed like it's normal or whatever. You know what I mean? And I basically, and like as I got old, as I learned more about it, and I think going back to where I grew up, being in that type of neighborhood, right? You kind of have to put up a facade, right? You can't show weakness, right? You show weakness, you're a victim, basically. And so like that's very much instilled in you as well. And so I think I just learned how to like create a facade to seem normal, if you will, regardless of what was going on in my head, right? Like my brain could be going a million miles an hour. I could be freaking out, but on the outside, everything's cool, chill, everything's normal. I'm gonna talk to you as is right now. I'm normal. You're none the wiser. And one specific example I thought of was the very first interview I ever had for like the digital marketing job that I got. I was nervous as hell, like super nervous. But like throughout the whole interview, did it, went great, obviously got the job. And at the very end, the VP was like, man, you seem pretty calm and cool, man. He's like, we got nerves to steal. I was like, oh no. I was like, I'm nervous as hell. Like at that point I just admitted. He's like, oh, you're like a duck on the lake with little feet underneath and we can see. I was like, yeah, definitely. I was like, my heart is racing right now. He was like, all right, well, he's like, you fooled us. I was like, cool. So like, yeah, so I think I just developed a way to like kind of hide that whenever possible. But as I got older, because I never learned to deal with the ADHD and all that stuff like that, it just got to a point where I couldn't deal with it anymore. And some of those symptoms are showing more and things like that. So that's what essentially led to the therapy. And then once I figured that out, it was just kind of figuring out what works for me. Because up to that point, I was basically trying to do what quote unquote normal, neurotypical, whatever you want to say, people do, right? Whether, day-to-day processes or whatever, and trying to like get by doesn't work for me because my brain doesn't work that way. I didn't know that until very recently. And since then, I've just made adjustments and changes. And, it's a continual process. It's never ending. But like, at least now I know versus before it'd be like, well, why am I failing at this? Well, why is this happening? Why am I feeling this way? Like, no, now I know why. You know what I mean? Maybe I can't fix the problem, but at least I know why, and why I'm feeling it maybe a little bit more or differently from other people, essentially.
How did you make quote unquote normal happen back then? Like you were talking about when you were younger and having like these auto reactions to things, and your therapist kind of reflecting on some of the things that you had shared with her. Like, how did you, as a child, try to adapt to make yourself seem normal?
So, I mean, so when I was really young, I didn't have a ton of friends. I was very like,
Yeah.
I lived in a bubble. I was in my apartment basically. It was that in school, right? I mean, I had my friends and stuff at school, but like I didn't hang out with a lot of people outside of school. Um, so I didn't really have to hide, if you will, anything like that. It wasn't until like I said, when I hit 10 and I started going outside, all the kids were a little bit older than me.
Mm-hmm.
And I think part of me trying to fit in was to try to be like them, you know, whatever. Because what 15-year-old wants to hang out with a 10-year-old, really? You know what I mean? Like we hung out because there weren't a lot of these kids downstairs, and you need bodies to play basketball or football or cricket or whatever. You know what I mean? So you know they would accept the 10-year-olds if they needed to, type of thing. Um, but yeah, I think just trying to mimic them again. The whole you can't show weakness. You know, I got in a lot of fist fights when I was little. Because you can't show weakness, that the whole thing or whatever. So like I think all that stuff just kind of just created again that facade or whatever. To the, you know, that I still have to this day. Like I know people, I've met so many people that like, oh, when I first met you, you know, before you said anything, you seemed like you were like a mean guy or whatever. And it's just like, yeah, I get it. Like I'd probably have that walk. I probably have that look on my face, still from a kid who doesn't want to get messed with, if you will. You know what I mean? But when I do, get a chance to speak to people, I try my best to be as friendly, as nice as possible. I like to make people laugh and you know be gregarious or whatever. So like you know, I also want to make sure I break that. You know, I want people to think that that's who I am because it's not. You know what I mean? Like I have a big heart. Um, so yeah, so I think it's that. Like I think a lot of that facade built up, and then once I get to meet people, I just try to be super nice, and I think that's you know I don't know, maybe it masks whatever weirdness or quirks I might have or something.
Yeah, but I mean, the quirks and the weirdness, I mean, that's what makes us all unique. I try to embrace my
Yeah.
weirdness because I have a lot of things
Yeah,
that I do
yeah.
are quite weird.
No, I
Um,
see. As I've gotten older, yeah, I've done that. Like as I've
yeah.
gotten older, I remember when it was before my kids were born. It was after I moved up here. I I, I remember looking at this Lego, like Iron Man Lego thing, right? And I loved Legos as a kid. I love Legos. But you know how it is. You get older, you kind of drop things that aren't cool anymore or whatever, right? And I'm sitting there, I'm looking, I'm in my mid-20s. I was like, man, why am I denying myself this? I got the money, right? Like if I buy it, all the bills are paid and there's food in the fridge, right? Cool. I don't have parents to tell me no. Like, and I love these things. I've always loved them. Like, why am I denying myself this? I was just like, all right, screw it. And I bought it. Right. And like, I think that was what sparked the like, just be you. You know what I mean? Like, yeah, okay, you're an adult who likes Legos. Whatever. If somebody thinks it's funny, they think it's funny. You know what I mean? And from there on, I've been more accepting of like the things that I like or the things that I enjoy or the quirks in my personality or whatever. You know what I mean? Because that's just me. You don't like it, whatever. Like I never really cared what people thought, but I never wanted to show the quirks either. But now it's like you see them, cool. You don't like it, move on. Like whatever. You know what I mean? Like at this point, I'm too old to care. I'm too old to like try to hide these things. I'm too old to like try to fight against this. Like I'm not normal. Cool, not normal. Never was. I just had to accept it. That's all it was.
Firstly, I can definitely relate to you on some level because I've been very similar in that I think some people make assumptions about
Yeah.
me and my personality sometimes because I can
Yeah.
look very serious.
Yes.
And even some of the people who I ended up being very close friends with later in like high school, when we became close friends, they would tell me, hey, like when I first met you, like I thought you were like super stuck up and looked down on me. I was like, no way.
Yeah, we talked about this, like at the company we're working at, like people didn't see your personality. Like I think people felt, yeah, maybe, I don't know if intimidated is the right word, but like it, like I would, like when I would say things about you to other people, they'd be like, really? We're like, yeah, have you not talked to her? Like, have you not had a chance to, like, you know, actually have a nice conversation with her? So like, make the effort. You know what I mean? Like, don't rely on someone else always. So I felt like a lot of people missed out on getting to really know you. I mean, not that I got to know you so well, but like what I did get to experience was always awesome. Like I said, you're a fun person to talk to. I could see how people, yeah, could be standoffish to you just because they don't know. You know, they don't know. I don't know, like how to approach you in a way that maybe won't piss you off. I don't know. Are you angry? Like, because I feel like people have that with me. So like, I often have to be, I feel like the one to say hi first. And I'm not a social, like I'm very like antisocial until I'm forced to be around people. Like if I have to be around you, I'm going to go out of my way to try to be friendly and nice, right? We don't have to be best friends or anything like that, but I want you to be comfortable around me. That's all it is. I don't want you to come into work and be like, oh, I gotta be here. That sucks. It's a horrible feeling to have. So yeah, so I try to break that as much as possible. And so I try, you know, obviously you and I didn't work a lot together because you were on the private side of things. But whenever I could, you remember, I would just go up to you and just say hi and just talk about random things.
Yeah. Yeah. It was really great. And I know you mentioned this kind of in some of our previous conversations, but I think that, you know, talking about ADHD, I think there's sometimes some misconceptions about what it is, what it isn't, and other impacts that it can have. And I know you mentioned to me that, you know, no matter what environment you're in, that's something you try to always do is make sure the people around you are happy because you actually worry about people's happiness.
Yeah. I mean, I don't like negativity around me. Like I really do try my best to not, you know, again, no one wants to be around me. I mean, there's certain times you can't avoid it, and that's just life and whatever. I'm not saying avoid problems or anything like that, but in regards to like, yeah, again, at work, you know, just to stick with that, it's like we're around each other 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. I've worked with people I don't like. I worked with a guy for 3 years who I didn't talk to. I almost fought once, actually. But like that feeling, that tension or whatever perceived tension kind of, you know, whatever that feeling that it built up around whenever he was around and I was around, I didn't like that. You know, this is a crappy feeling.
Surprising enough, even though I'm hosting a podcast, I'm a big introvert. And because of some of my life circumstances as a child, also having a disability myself, like I also deal with a lot of anxiety too. So I think that those things combined can sometimes make me seem kind of standoffish but
which is understandable. I get it. Yeah. Which I think for me was probably even more reason for me to try to break that for you as much as I could, at least. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because I never wanted you to feel like, you know, you're not a part of this group. Like you're literally sitting right there with us. Like even though you're working on the other side of the business, like you're right there. Like that'd be rude for me to be like, hi everyone but Tisha. You know what I mean? Like, hey everybody but Tisha, want to go to lunch with me? Like that's just, you know what I mean? Like that's just rude and it's not nice. On top of the fact that again, I do like enjoy talking, but even if I didn't, even if I found you annoying, I would still be like, hey Tisha, you want to come? Like, because I'm that person, I'm still gonna be that guy, isn't it? You know what I mean? But like, so yeah, again, you're gonna be around us sometimes more than your own family and husband and whatever. Like that sucks. So let's try to make it at least decent.
Yeah. I mean, I always felt included in the group, but for me, like I sometimes enjoy observing more than I do actually interacting sometimes. So just a quirk, I think, of being an introvert. But anyway, so when you were dealing with this, I mean, not only was it the pandemic, but you were also like into your 30s when you actually were diagnosed ADHD. Like, do you remember, like, we talked about this a little bit, but was there anything else kind of going on in your head when you were like, God, like I'm 30 plus and I just found out I was ADHD?
I mean, so the first thing that popped in my head is like, damn, I wonder how different things would be had I known. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like one example, when I was 26, I found out I have an astigmatism, right? Which basically makes everything blurry. But when you're growing up with everything blurry, you don't know everything is blurry, right?
Yeah.
I grew up playing baseball, and I was a pretty decent hitter till I got hurt and actually had an eye injury. Got shot with a BB gun and like right at the edge of my eye, which messed up my vision a little bit. But I could still, play a little bit, whatever. But when I was 26, the doctor's sitting there, she's checking my eyes, and in the middle of the conversation, because we were talking about baseball, she was like, "Question, were you a good hitter?" And I was like, "Yeah, I was actually usually one of the best hitters on my team." I was like, "Why?" She's like, "You have an astigmatism." And the only reason I knew what that was is because my best friend Robert also had it. So, but I was like, "What?" And she's like, "Yeah." I was like, "You telling me I could be making $20 million a year?" And I found this out 10 years ago. She was like, "Maybe."
Oh man.
So it's kind of like, obviously that's an exaggerated version of like possibilities. But as far as the ADHD one, it was kind of a similar feeling like, well, damn, like I struggled doing this, or I struggled making friends and fitting in sometimes. Like it could have made life a little easier just knowing. That's it, just knowing. You know what I mean? I pride myself in being able to figure things out. So just knowing all the information would allow me to figure out what works for me at that point. And I was essentially robbed of the opportunity. Now, it's no one's fault. It is what it is. Like you said, there's a lot of misconceptions about what ADHD is. And I don't necessarily check off all the usual like boxes, if you will, which is usually what people think of as like hyperactivity and not being able to sit down and stuff like that. Like I was very opposite as a kid. My mom would be like, "Sit there." And I would just sit there. But my ADHD brain would have me, in a whole different universe, creating amazing stories, fully fleshed out things and stuff like that. It just looked like I was just a kid chilling there, being nice and respectful, but I was just lost in space doing my own thing. Like, so like, but again, but no one knew. Again, when people don't know, they don't know. So it's no one to blame. It just is what it is.
Yeah. My husband is also ADHD,
Yeah,
and he officially got diagnosed again just recently in his near mid 30s. And he was diagnosed as a child, but something happened when he was in ROTC in college, and there was some basically HIPAA violations, and one of his officers found out and he started getting treated differently. So there was a lot of like stigma, and I think he had to go through some things. But recently, like it's been, I think, such a relief for him reflecting back on his, first 15 plus years as an adult and saying, "Oh my gosh, like the reason why I am like this is because of my ADHD. Like there's nothing wrong with me. Like I'm not an asshole. I'm not like crazy for the way I think."
Exactly. It's just how the brain works. That's just how your brain works.
Yeah. And he calls his internal monologue. Like when he's off in a different universe, he's like, "My internal monologue, like my friends." But yeah, and I was talking to someone else on this show too, who has a different condition, but we were talking about how, there's nothing wrong with us. It's just like we as humans are all machines, and certain machines need this type of oil and other machines need this type of oil. And you can't just not give yourself the oil too. Like sometimes, part of being diagnosed means like being open to trying certain things. And I know that there can be sometimes like misconceptions or stigmas around taking medication, because it's like, oh, like you have to take meds in order to be normal. It's like, no, like my machine just operates differently from your machine. So
and honestly, since the diagnosis, like I've been like, speaking of quirks, right? Like, the way I work, whatever, like in regards to like what we do, right? I need a lot of time to just think. So sometimes I just have to sit there and think, right? That's how I get my best ideas. That's how my brain works. But I was always afraid to look like I'm not working, right? And so I would like half think, half work, half think, half work, half think, half work, and things would take longer to get done because I couldn't fully focus on one thing or the other, or I'd be so focused on the thing that I want to think of and I'm trying to do the work, but I can't really get it done or get it done right because my brain is focusing on something else. And since then, like I've told my, superiors, like, hey, just to let you know, if you see me like looking up at the ceiling for 5 or 10 minutes, I'm not doing anything. I'm probably going through a process of things in my head because there's a problem or there's something going on and I'm trying to find a solution. I have to think about it. I have to think, if I do this, this happens. Well, if this happens, then this happens. Well, if this happens, and these things then happen. Like I have to go through that whole process so that when I make a change in the account, we don't sink it. You know what I mean? I'm not as afraid to be like, yo, I need 5-10 minutes to walk around. Or I don't even ask for it. I just get up and go. But like I told them, hey, if you see me do that, just understand like I'm working. It's a process. I promise you. You know what I mean? And hell, if you don't believe me, look at the numbers and tell me I'm wrong.
Everyone I'm bringing on the show, I see as being an average goat, like someone who's inspirational, has an incredible journey, and I think can be really relatable, and hopefully inspire other people too. But if it's not someone, and maybe it can be someone, is there something throughout your life that has been your inspiration for getting you to where you are today, or that keeps you going today?
Just the life that I grew up, basically, right? Like I don't want to go back to that. That to me is the scariest thing on earth, is being forced to move back to an area that's dangerous, an area that I'm not comfortable in, an area that I can't raise my children in. It's that feeling, you know what I mean? That knowledge of what's going on, all the things that I learned afterwards and stuff like that, like literal nightmares that I've had my entire life of moments that have happened. Like I don't want that to happen to my kids. I don't want that to happen to anyone that I care about, basically, right? And so, yeah, what keeps it going is just making sure everyone around me is good. You know what I mean? Emotionally, physically, financially, everything. I just want people to be good. So I just keep working towards that, whatever that is.
Awesome. Well, Manny, this has been so much fun. I really appreciated you sharing your story with me. I think that there's a lot of elements of your journey that are very relatable for so many people. And I hope that they are able to connect and feel inspired. So. And, for those of you who necessarily haven't had similar experiences, just learning. I think, part of this also is just informing people and breaking down some of those like barriers, those judgments, those stigmas, et cetera. So I really, really appreciate you coming on the show and sharing.
No, thank you. I appreciate you having me. This is the first time I think I've ever told like a whole life story like this. It's interesting. I'm going to be analyzing this. And speaking of ADHD, I'm going to be analyzing this for probably next week. But it was awesome. I really, really appreciate it. It was great talking to you, obviously, and all that stuff. And we should definitely stay in touch beyond this podcast.
Not Your Average Goat is produced and edited by yours truly, with music by Sergey Quadrado and Anton Blazov. All content is copyrighted and should not be recreated, reproduced, or reused without explicit consent. Please visit notyouraveragegoat.org/contact for questions.